Hello, and welcome to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena, a podcast for artists and storytellers about changing the world for the better through story. So last week we had on a special guest, Jennifer Dornbush, and she is back again. She is a forensic specialist. We're talking about evidentiary tracking and ways that you can make sure that your story follows those correct processes to be able to set up and pay off whatever kind of story you're telling. It's all stuff that, even though it sounds like it's only crime related, it isn't. It is stuff that is true to every story, and I wanted her to come back and continue talking about this very important subject. So welcome back, Jennifer, and thank you for being here again.
Yay, I'm back like a diaper rash. No.
I'm always telling people I am the hemorrhoid on the butt of Christianity because I make people uncomfortable. So it can be a diaper rash. Sure, why not? You write a lot of female protagonists. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes what I see is when people are writing a female protagonist, we tend to give them masculine characteristics. Mm-hmm. And downplay their feminine characteristics. Mm. What do you think of that? Do you think that's true? Do you think that that's a problem? What are your thoughts?
I definitely see where you're coming from, because I do notice that as well. It's funny, and I've had conversations about this with other people too, but I don't think I've ever thought about it in terms of my own writing, because I just write from, I guess, a female point of view. And so when my female characters, they'll take a bubble bath to decompress and in lavender oil. Like, I don't know, they're female. They do female things. She catches the killer and then she takes a bubble bath with lavender oil and candles. So I love that. Yeah, I would have to. It's funny. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever thought about it through my own. I just write how I think females react. I think depending on what their skill set is in that certain profession, there are certain things that they have to do. Like if they're a detective, yes, they're going to carry a gun. They're going to know how to shoot a gun. They're going to know how to do tactical things, but that's not what defines them.
So you are very passionate about having an evidentiary trail. Can you talk to us about, because you said there's kind of a standard procedure of the way things would go.
Oh, right.
Can you give us that? What is that?
Right. Yeah, let's see if I can pull it all up from my brain here and try to do it quickly. So when a crime happens, let's say crime happens, right? Somebody is alerted to crime, whatever, if it's a neighbor or a friend or whoever. Anyway, first responders are called in. Typically. And I'm kind of talking about any crime. There's at some point after a crime is committed, the authorities are alerted to the fact that a crime has happened.
So step one, the crime. Step two, authorities are alerted.
Somehow. Even with white collar crimes, whether it's reported to the FBI or the police or whatever, there is a reporting process of like, hey, I think a crime is occurring here. After that, it kind of depends on what kind of crime, but if we're not talking white collar crimes, and we're talking crimes that might involve the harm of a human being, then or the harm of property or both, then first responders are called in. So that might be your fire, it might be your EMTs, it might be your police. And at that point, they determine, is there a crime happening? And then they determine, where is this crime happening? And I'm giving you this in very general terms. There's kind of a lot more to it in terms of how do you determine if a crime is happening? And then what is the boundary of that crime? How big is it? Or the area, the physical boundary of that. Or if it's digital, that's a huge difference in what kind of boundary, where does that all touch? Where does that crime, spiderweb into? And so at that point, let's say a crime is determined, a boundary is at least estimated, and then that is secured. So that area, that boundary has to be secured. Digital looks a little different. That's kind of its own animal. But if it's a physical crime, then once that boundary is secured, then your police can go in and start looking for evidence. There are 6 different types of evidence. There is physical evidence. Under physical evidence, you have like trace. So physical is anything we can touch, see, right? Like this lip gloss, or, you know, a fingernail, a piece
or
of hair.
blood spatter.
Blood spatter. That is actually biological evidence.
Oh,
but
okay,
it's also but it is okay. It's also physical evidence.
Okay.
There's trace evidence, which is also physical evidence. So it might be just like a little piece of hair or a little thread or a little shard of glass. It's still evidence, but it's a small amount. There's there's impression evidence, which is also a subset of physical evidence. So like if I take a hammer and smack my wall here, it's going to leave an impression of my hammerhead. So I don't have the hammer, but I have the impression of the hammer.
So I know there was a hammer.
I don't have a shoe, but I have a shoe print. I don't have a print, a mud, you know, I don't have a footprint, but I have a print in the mud from a foot. So that's anything that's, or a tire track, anything that's sort of an impression into something that you can then trace back to the original. And then there's direct evidence, which we see more and more of, because that's the actual like either witness testimony or anything I've filmed on my phone or taken a picture of, or security cameras, or I have a little camera in my car, like that, any sort of video like where you can actually see something happening, like
Something
that's
that was captured.
Or like a witness testimony also counts because they were there and their oral testimony counts as direct evidence. And then last we have circumstantial evidence, which is my favorite kind of evidence. And actually it's the kind of evidence that most cases are tried with, and that it's the hardest kind of evidence to assemble and to prove, because it's basically like you have to take all of like the things surrounding the event, like who saw what and who said what and what did they hear, and or tracking timelines is a big one. Tracking timelines of when things happened is all circumstantial evidence that has to point to a certain person committing that particular crime. So it's very gray. It can be very gray. It's not black and white like DNA. DNA is very black and white. Fingerprints, very black and white. Excuse me. A shard of glass that came from a windshield. It's either did or it didn't. So, but circumstantial is very gray evidence where you're taking a lot of like the prosecutor
piece together the big picture.
Together the picture, and it's all got to point without a reasonable doubt to this person did this crime to this person at this time. So, yeah.
So, okay. So, and that's 6. But 4 of those, or maybe it was were physical.
Physical are all part of physical evidence. Yeah.
Okay. So they're categories of physical. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was at Biola and I was getting my master's in apologetics. One of the things, one of the classes I took was, on the evidence, right? Evidentiary propositions, all these things. And one of the problems with pursuing a particular rationale or whatever is always when we read into it, we don't allow the evidence to lead us where it wants to lead us. We are trying to make the evidence lead us to a particular conclusion. We've already made up our mind.
Right.
So is this something that is also part of the process or the forensic process of you try not to lead it to a certain end, I'm assuming? And
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, because you're also, so as we're collecting all this evidence, right, it's not the collector's job to make any sort of, what's the word I want? Decree, assessments, a good word. I love that. About
conclusions
or conclusions. Your job is just to collect all these types of things, anything you can find, and then you lay it into the case file.
Right. So again, going back to the step-by-step process, step 1, there's a crime. Step 2, authorities are alerted. Step 3, first responders are dispatched. Step 4, detectives are called in to analyze, start collecting evidence.
Collect all the evidence. Yep.
Okay, and so once all the evidence is collected, we're at step 5 now,
Right.
which is analyzing the evidence.
Exactly. And so sometimes that goes to a lab, evidence goes to a lab. Sometimes it's, taking all this witness testimony and writing it out. You're basically, again, you're making this huge crime, file of everything. And you're tracking, and once you're starting to analyze the leads, then you can start to, and it takes a while. It takes a while to get everything back. It can take months and months and months to get everything back. And if there's a body involved, that's a whole, the autopsy and the whole investigation of the body, that's a whole nother report that has to come in, and toxicology if they get involved. So there could be many, many pieces to this file. But once you have all that information, then the lead person on that investigation, which is usually a detective or a police officer, can then start to look, or maybe a team of people as well, can start to look at it and start to say, okay, where is the evidence leading us to? And
primary suspects. So
Right.
one thing I like about Bosch, again, I keep bringing up Bosch, but one thing I always liked about Bosch is that it wasn't one of those fast-moving police detective or a new crime every week. There's like a crime each season. Usually he has a couple of cases he's working on, but it's a real slow trajectory. Like it's more in real time of what it would be like. And so there's a lot of time that goes between the actual crime and when an arrest is actually made, because of how much time it takes to gather that evidence.
Right. And you can see where, like, you can see this part of it, and maybe that leads you to this person, but then you get some more information, and then, well, that person, no, couldn't have done it. It's that maybe the new information leads you over here. And so that's also what you want to do when you're building your story, right? You're going to lead us to this person, and then we're going to find out why that person, it can't be that person. And then it's going to lead us to,
but in that, then that person gives you a clue that gives you the next lead. Right. Or it's a dead end completely, and then you have to go back to the drawing board and be like, what did I miss? There's something here. I'm missing something.
Yeah. Or new information comes in that completely changes the trajectory. And yeah.
Although I would say that's probably true in real life, and dangerous in stories, because that's almost like Deus ex machina, where all of a sudden you get a hint from out of nowhere, and that's kind of cheating. So I would say for our writers that might be dangerous, but
I usually say, like, most of your act 2 is going to be bouncing to different suspects, or maybe you're pretty sure who, you can mold crime stories in different ways, or maybe you're pretty sure who did it, but you just need to find the right evidence. So your act 2 is really all about getting to that person who done it. And then in act 3, okay, so at the end of act 2, I like to always put my hero in great danger. It's kind of like that whiff of death, right? Where they almost die, right? They're being threatened by something externally, but usually it has to do with the killer. And like, you think this is it for them. They're never going to solve this, and they're probably going to die. Like, that's just it. Always, you can just do that every time when you're writing a crime, because that's what the genre asks
requires.
And then your act 3 is your protagonist picking themselves back up and saying, and looking at things again in a different way and saying, oh wait, I think I figured it out. It's this person. And then they go after that person, and then we have a nice final battle. But then of course in the end, they get the guy. Final showdown, but they get the guy. Justice is served. I'm totally simplifying this because you can do it in a lot of ways, but that's generally what you want to do. Obviously in real life that takes a lot longer. And sometimes it doesn't happen at all.
But like in Chinatown, that's one of the great genre movies, I suppose, in this way. It's like forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. The bad guy
Right.
gets away with it. But that's from a point of view of, boy, the rich get away with everything.
Yeah. And it's a tragedy. And I think
It is a tragedy.
those kind of crime stories work, but they're more few and far between. I think most of the time we want to see chaos.
Justice.
We want to see justice. We want to see
And
chaos
you know what?
ordered.
Speaking of that, this is where sometimes I take issue with a lot of Christians who argue that, oh, Hollywood just does all these bad things, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, they're actually, just the fact that we tend to want to watch crime stories where there is a satisfactory ending where the bad guy comes to justice, that's a Judeo-Christian value.
Oh yeah.
That Hollywood is mimicking. You know, they know that because it's ingrained in our humanity. So that's actually a biblical worldview.
It is. I think it's exactly. I love this genre because it's very true to our humanity.
Our need for justice, our need for wrongs to be righted, for people that commit and do bad things, we want them to not get away with it.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, I teach a whole thing on why people want this genre. That's definitely one of the top reasons. And I think one of the other reasons is, you know, we want chaos to be ordered. And when a crime happens, that's chaos. That's the ultimate chaos. Murder is the ultimate chaos. And we want that to be ordered in some way at the end, because I think even though maybe we don't have murder in our own lives, we have a lot of chaos in our lives and all around us. And it doesn't get to be ordered all the time. There's stuff that is continually unresolved, whether it's outside of us or with our friends or family or personally. And sometimes it gets ordered, but a lot of times it doesn't get ordered, or it takes a very long time to get ordered, or we won't see it get ordered within our lifetime. And so this genre gives us an opportunity to step in and for like 45 minutes be like, yes, the world is right.
The world is right. But, you know, speaking of that, though, and now I'm getting into the philosophical side of all of this, but the truth is, I think it's an argument for creation. And here's why. Because evolutionists want to argue that it's chaos, right? It's chaos. It's all meaningless. And yet, what do we do in science? We create order. We look at it. We're looking for meaning. Why would we even look for meaning if we really believed it was chaos?
Right.
See, when we do a crime, we're looking that we know there is an answer. Yeah. We know that something led to this, whether it's the victimology that you're talking about or whatever we're looking at. We know that if we have all the pieces of the evidence, we will solve this. We will find the solution. It will lead to somebody, because nobody just dies for nothing. No. There is a reason. It all has meaning. Yeah. Everything in that victim's world has meaning. And the same is true in creation. And yet, what do evolutionists do? They say, oh, well, it looks ordered, but it's not. You know, they deny the whole design thing, but it's beyond common sense. That's where we're actually, that's the willfully ignorant part. Like, it doesn't even make sense on a humanity level. We know that it makes sense. We know that this world does make sense. So it doesn't make sense to ignore the fact that it actually makes sense.
Right. And there are, no, it's 100%. And this is why this genre is so popular, I believe, because also you think about it from the criminal point of view, which I do a lot. There's a reason why criminals commit crimes. There is always a reason. Yes. And it's usually seeded back to childhood and things that have happened to them and generational things. There is always, you can always trace it back. And I mean, look at all these like true crime shows and Criminal Minds, all about getting into the mind of the criminal and why did they do it? Why we want to know why this chaos. Like, we want to know why.
What led them to do this? I'm always fascinated by those shows where, you know, the husband and the wife, and somehow the guy decides, well, I can't get a divorce, but I'll kill her.
Kill her.
Yeah, like it's just crazy, right? Like, that's crazy, but it isn't crazy. No. There's a logic. There is a logic. And this is where it does come back to, again, something I've argued from the beginning. Writers have to be amateur psychologists. We have to understand humanity.
Yes. And we have this book called the Bible, which tells us how human beings best operate and when they don't operate, what happens.
Yep. Yep.
I
And
mean,
and why? I mean, it's always about covering, we're
yeah.
just, and we're so reluctant to admit our shortcomings. I mean, it's just so true. I really think that almost every story has at its root a spiritual issue.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh
But,
yeah.
and mind you, I don't write, and you don't either. We're not writing for the quote Christian subgenre, and which I
Right.
love that about you, because I don't either.
Hmm.
We're trying to both write for
Right.
secular audience, but all of our stories have that in it simply because it's true,
It's
and you can't
humanity.
help
Yeah.
it. Yeah, can't help
Yeah.
but have it come out.
But we were talking about the truth about humans, and when, even if you look at the Bible, I mean, you want to talk about murder and crime, the Bible shows us the very first crime, murder in the world with Cain and Abel.
And the like you said,
Yeah.
you have to have
And why?
motive,
Yep.
opportunity, and means.
Yep.
All of it is right there.
All of it's right there. And nothing has changed since that story.
Yeah. I'm jealous of my brother. Okay.
Yep. I want more. I want more. I have ego. I have pride. I want more. I want to be more. I want to, yeah.
Yeah. God favored him and not me. I'm
Mhm.
killing him.
And I mean, right? Isn't the root of that, I am going to be God? Because if you
That's
take
right.
a person's life, you are acting in the place of of God. Like, you think, I have control over human life, and I'm going to control it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's what Satan has been doing from the beginning. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Isn't
It
it?
all
Yeah.
comes down to that. And it is. It's about our own arrogance. It's about
Mhm.
our ego. It's always about our own like we've been wronged,
Mhm.
and by God now I have the right
Mhm.
to enact justice on God's
Exactly.
behalf. I
Right.
am God.
Right. And that's why all those men kill their wives.
Yeah, it's true. At the end of the day,
It is.
it's true. It's so interesting because we
I
know all that. Okay,
Yeah.
so now I want to change the topic slightly. So you've been talking about true crime. I mean, not true crime, but real actual crime stories. And I want to talk to you about like how you would use this in, let's say somebody's writing like a fantasy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in that fantasy, there's usually a mysterious element.
Mm.
Right?
Mhm.
So now it's not a crime, it's a mysterious element, but it still applies. All these things still apply. What would that look like for the characters in that to try to
Mhm.
figure out or to understand what this mysterious element is at work in that narrative?
Right. Let's just change the verbiage to investigation.
Okay.
And there you have it. So they are not, the motor of crime stories is investigation. So if you have a mysterious element, your character is just simply in trying to investigate, what is this? What is it doing? What does it mean? Whatever they're trying to, figure out about that mysterious element. So the structure is really quite the same, because they'll spend most of Act 2 looking for their trails of evidence in their investigation into, what is this mysterious thing? How do I figure this out? It's all it is. It's the same. How do I figure this out? How do I figure this thing out? Well, I'm going to go on an investigation, and I'm going to follow the trails of evidence that lead me to discover what this
The
thing is.
truth about whatever's really
The
going
truth.
on.
Yep.
Okay. So you know that I've been working on a novel for way too long now.
It's going to be brilliant.
Yes, we can hope. It's called The Bottomless Box. And in The Bottomless Box, I've got two characters, Percy and Wilbur. And they end up being transported back to that planet because of the bottomless box that they conjure. But travel between those planets is forbidden. They don't know that for a while. But then and in fact, they don't know that the gods and goddesses of, Celtic folklore actually exist in the land of Duma. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're made of. They don't know that they're from Duma. But slowly along the way, they start to piece together, somehow they are central in whatever, drama is playing out in this land of Duma. And now they have to make the switch to trying to figure out, well, now what? Right. But mostly what they're doing when they first get there, they're just trying to find a hiding place. They're trying to find a safe place to hide from the master that they think is evil.
Okay.
So talk to me about a story like this, right? Where the characters aren't even aware that there's a phenomenon going on. I mean, I don't know. Is this something like you can speak to, or is this just too specific to my story?
I think I mean, because I don't know all the specifics of your story, but I think
nobody does, including
right. I think from what I'm hearing, there would be a world in which you are still planting little clues and little pieces of evidence that, even though they don't know what it means yet, you as the creator of the story know how it's going to tie together. So in the sense, it's still, you're still leading them through an investigation without them. They don't know it yet, but later they'll be able to go back and say, oh yeah, that meant this and that meant this, and then that led to this and da 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 da.
And so they're discovering it along with the audience.
Right. Which is certainly also one way how crime stories are written, where your protagonist, you're discovering it with the protagonist. You can definitely, anyway, just one, there's many ways you can tell the story, but yeah, I think that's one way you could do it. I mean, one way to think about it, I guess.
Well, me too, and that's what I'm doing. But I think that part of what I'm trying to also impress upon people is that at some point, though, the switch has to happen. Otherwise, they become just too passive. So in my story, I'm just using that for an example because it's the one I can identify this trajectory with. They're actually pursuing something completely different. Completely different, but in pursuit of that, they're finding out all these things that they're like, wait a minute, this is weird. Okay, we're looking for this, but and then at some point something happens where now they have to suspend pursuing that thing that they thought they were there to pursue, because this takes over. This now takes precedence, and now it's too big for them to ignore, and now they have to deal with that thing. And I think that that's what I'm trying to say. Otherwise, they become passive characters when just happen to them.
Right, exactly. And then they can use all the things that they've already been collecting and start to apply them to the new trajectory.
Exactly.
Start to build their case, I guess, so to speak.
And that's what it is. I mean, that's the thing. Even there, all the clues are still the same evidence, like you're talking about.
Right.
They're just not aware that they're supposed to put it together right away.
Right.
Which is a slightly different thing, because they're not there to investigate that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm just trying to see
how it works.
It works with everything.
Yeah.
I really think it does.
It does. Yeah.
So what would you say?
Because isn't it, I mean, tell me what you think about this, but I would say in Storyland, in Story World, every story is an investigation by the hero to try to find the truth, whatever their truth is that they're looking for.
Right. Now, I would modify the language slightly instead of their truth, only because I get tired of this idea of subjective truth. We believe in objective truth.
Right.
And so the truth.
Right. And I just meant it as topical. It's like, but yes, thank you for clarifying, because I agree with you. But yeah, whatever the
big truth is.
They are looking for the truth in their topical truth.
Right. The one that's relevant to them.
Right. Exactly.
But it's still an objective truth.
Right.
So yes, I totally agree. I just get hung up on things like that. That's
I know. It can be interpreted in a worldly sense.
For example, a character, let's say, who maybe they're pursuing the answer, who solved this crime, but their objective truth is that deep down they're terrified of such and such because of their own trauma, and they have to step into the hero they have to face those fears and once and for all confront the person that abused them when they were young. I mean,
or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And also I think exactly that. And also I think that thing, like, I'm just going to use the trauma because that's what we're talking about, but whatever the thing is that they're trying to, can make them, I like it that it makes them make bad decisions too. Like it causes them to make bad decisions that then reflect upon the case and maybe steer the case in a way they didn't intend, or maybe even they step outside the bounds of law because they're dealing with this and they can't deal with it properly. Like I have a scene where my protagonist oversteps into this person's property and starts searching when she has not been invited, has no warrant, but she's so dogged to catch them because her own trauma is just feeding that need for justice.
And the fear that if she doesn't do it right now, it will be gone. And so she has to do it right now. I mean, the
they'll
stakes
keep
are
doing
high.
it. And so I think that's an interesting thing to play around with our characters, is to give them the trauma makes them do things that are not beneficial to them or the case.
Well, and that's where it comes down to, this is the fatal flaw, right? So one of the things that has bothered me as of late is in stories where I see characters with a fatal flaw, but what people are giving them is actually some sort of, they're morally reprehensible characters. They're actually just bad people. But that's not what we want. We want heroic people who have noble goals, but because of their own shortcomings, their impatience, because of their passion for truth and justice, they overstep and they keep falling into the trap. They keep kicking themselves. They keep, they keep hurting themselves over and over and over again. That's their fatal flaw, but it comes from a good place, not a bad place.
Right, exactly. And then when they overcome that, we cheer. We're so excited, But,
Yep. And then they have to maybe be extra clever. They can't actually resolve it the typical way you would. They have to go above and beyond to be able to solve it because they've messed it up. And now they have to redeem it even further.
Right. Or they have to do some really self-sacrificial act because they don't have the power within themselves to overcome it, which is so how we are, like that weakness, like finding strength in our weakness and having to give up things and sort of let a supernatural power step in because we can't, we're just not physically able or mentally able to do it. So many ways about it.
It's just awesome, right? It's so exciting. I love being a storyteller. Like I love thinking about these types of things. It's exciting.
Yeah, me too. And you've helped me because I'm working on a story, which you actually know about. And the protagonist, it's true crime. And, but the protagonist too, she gets in her own way. The more I'm learning about her as a person, as a real person, and why did she get murdered? Why? And again, not her to blame at all, but that persistence for justice, that stubbornness is a good trait, but also it's the thing that got her in trouble,
Right. And the thing about that, here's where this is a tricky line, right? Because what happens is we could say, oh, well, see, she should have never gone that far. But no, actually, the only thing standing in the way of evil are people, good people that shut up. I mean, I'm really bastardizing that quote, but
right.
We have to stand up for justice, even if it costs us something. It actually can make a character more noble, more heroic, because they need to do it. And so the story that you're working on, which I know, the character in question, that was her. Like it did get her killed, but thank God. Right. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, because she didn't kowtow to evil. She had to stand up for it because it was the right thing to do, but she knew that what it would probably cost her, and she still did it. That makes somebody incredibly heroic, because we don't fear man. It is far more fearful to stand before God and say, well, I was afraid of man, so I didn't do it.
I gave up. Yeah. I stayed home, or
So Jennifer, what passion points on this topic do you have that we haven't covered?
Actually, this is when I talk about crime story types, I have 11, and this is number 11, and I call it the caper. And I know that sounds light, but it's basically the vengeance tale, where you, instead of rooting, your protagonist is actually your quote unquote bad guy. And instead of investigating a crime, you're following this person who's orchestrating a crime for the whatever, put in your blank, for whatever reason he or she has. Ocean's 11, they're all capers.
Butch Cassidy and
the Sundance Kid. Hell or High Water, which is one of my favorites. They're all these kind of amazing caper, vengeance stories, and there's a reason why. The Sting. There's a reason why these criminals have a very strong motivation. They are taking justice in their own hands, but they have strong motivation as to why they're doing it. They usually have been wronged by the system, or have been treated unjustly, or the justice system has broken down or wasn't in place properly, and so then they go about
their only recourse.
Yes.
And that's the difference between does it work or doesn't it. It doesn't just come out squeaky clean either.
Right.
There's a cost.
There's always a cost.
There's a cost. And that's something that, otherwise we glorify it too.
Right.
And so, those brothers had no other recourse in Hell or High Water, except for to let it go.
Right, exactly.
But they chose not to, but they paid heavily for it.
Yes, they did. They sure did. Yeah. And so did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
And yeah, they paid.
And so did Thelma and Louise. And so, but I think the fun ones are like The Italian Job, Ocean's 11. That's fun. It's fun. And
it's fun, but it is, and again, the only way it can be fun is if there is a justifiable reason why they're doing it. Otherwise, they're just jerks.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. All right. Well, I love all of this. I think this is so great. And again, I just want to remind everybody that if you want to read Forensic Speak, it is available for 20% off for listeners of the Storyteller's Mission. All you have to do is click on the link and you'll be taken there to get it, which is great. It really is. It's a glossary of terms for these types of things if you're writing crime stuff. And by the way, a lot of stories cross over into that, even if you're not writing that. So I'm happy I have my copy. Jennifer, you are wonderful. You're just so authentic. You're so good. You're so good at what you do, but you're also just a beautiful soul. And I just really have enjoyed and appreciate your friendship. So thank you.
And I love what you're doing with Storyteller Mission. And we need more people to be bold and courageous in their storytelling, because I truly believe that's the only way our crazy chaotic world, murderous world, crime-filled world is going to change, with truth and justice and light and hope. And that's what you bring. And thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lowe. May you go forth inspired to change the world for the better through story.